I was standing just out of frame. The ring light cast a halo over her face, flawless in foundation and softly filtered confidence. Ivy was laughing, her voice perfectly pitched for the live stream, bright, polished, practiced. "Oh, that," she said, gesturing behind her. "That's just Helen, the housekeeper we inherited with the property. She's been here for years, sweet woman. Keeps the garden lovely. My name was not spoken, like it belonged to me." It floated into the air like something she had dusted off and repurposed. Her friends on the stream chuckled not unkindly, just complicit in the performance. Caleb stood beside her, hands in his pockets, smiling like none of this felt strange. Like I wasn't his mother. Like I wasn't standing in the kitchen I built in the home I paid for behind the camera. They never pointed in my direction. I didn't interrupt. I wiped my hands on the towel that still hung by the stove, the one with the embroidered H. I stitched in the first winter we moved in. I set the tray of lemon cookies on the marble counter, my counter, and turned back toward the sunroom. The sound of laughter followed me, soft and stinging. It wasn't just what she said it was, how easily he let her say it, and how quiet I had become, without even realizing. I used to teach high school literature. I once spoke for a living, guided rooms full of restless minds through the words of Austen and Baldwin and Morrison. I could command attention not because I was loud, but because I believed I had something worth saying. Somewhere between the dinner parties I cooked for the late-night laundry loads and the temporary arrangement that became permanent, I lost that voice. Or maybe I gave it away piece by piece, waiting for someone to remember where it came from. I was not the housekeeper, I was the homeowner. I bought this house when Caleb was 10 after his father died, and it was just the two of us. I refinished the floors on my knees, painted every wall, planted the lavender outside the kitchen window. I made this house breathe, but Ivy never asked. She assumed, she curated, she erased, and Caleb let her. That day, as the camera kept rolling and the followers sent heart emojis and fire icons, I stood perfectly still, behind the frame, and finally saw the scene for what it was: not a misunderstanding, but a rewriting, a quiet edit of my presence until it no longer fit their version of the story. And that's when I knew this wasn't just about humiliation. This was about clarity. And I was done being a supporting character in a life I built from scratch. I wasn't erased with anger, I was edited out with a smile. We bought the house when Caleb was 10, and his shoes were still muddy from soccer, and his dreams were still stitched together with string and cardboard. It wasn't much then, just a worn-down craftsman with creaky floorboards and windows that sighed when the wind passed through. But to us, it was a castle. We painted the front door yellow because he said yellow made things feel warm. Every weekend, we added something small: new knobs on the kitchen drawers, shelves for his dinosaur models, a light fixture I found on clearance and installed myself after watching 2 hours of tutorials. Back then, laughter didn't echo in this house. It lived here. It spilled over cereal bowls and late-night movie marathons, bounced off hallway walls when we danced to old Motown records, during cleaning days, and filled every empty crack, like sunlight, through stained glass. I was still teaching then, high school English, at the public school 5 blocks away, and every afternoon I'd come home to Caleb sitting at the kitchen counter, legs swinging, asking if he could help stir the sauce or read me his spelling list. While I chopped vegetables, he made cards for me every birthday, every holiday, and even some random Tuesdays when he felt I needed one. To the best mom chef builder in the world, he wrote once, in crooked handwriting with a glitter pen he borrowed from a friend. We didn't have much, but we had each other. We had stories, our stories. We had Saturday pancakes with too many blueberries, and bedtime talks, where he'd ask me if I thought dreams could be mailed. If someone didn't have enough imagination, I told him yes, that I'd send him one every night. If he ever ran out. When he was 14, he built a birdhouse for me for Mother's Day, painted it lavender, because he remembered it was my favorite flower. We hung it outside the back window and watched robins come and go every spring, even after he went off to college, even when I sat at the kitchen table alone with tea and a book that house still hummed with memory. When he called, he'd ask if the lavender was blooming yet. When he came home, he'd always reach into the pantry for the granola bars I still stocked for him, even though he hadn't eaten them in years. The first time he brought Ivy home, she was all smiles and soft voice and compliments on the backsplash. I had tiled myself. She called the house quaint and asked where we got the antique dining chairs. Caleb looked proud when he said Mom restored those herself, and I remember thinking, maybe, just maybe she'd see what I built, not just where she could fit, her own reflection. For a while, it seemed that way. They came for holidays. For birthdays, Ivy brought candles and wine, helped set the table, laughed at my stories. Then they asked if they could stay for a few months, to save for a place of their own, just temporary. Caleb said, "We'll help with bills. Promise." I didn't hesitate. I turned the guest room into their bedroom, bought extra towels, cleared space in the closet. It was still home, after all, and that's what home was, for making space. But months turned to seasons, then a year, and slowly the sounds changed. Laughter grew quieter, then rarer. Ivy redecorated. First the bathroom, then the living room, always just a few updates. The birdhouse was taken down when she said it clashed with her new aesthetic. The yellow front door was painted white for a more modern curb appeal. My books were boxed and moved to the attic. My photos disappeared from shelves. The kitchen, once filled with the smell of simmering stew and radio music, became a silent white showroom. I still made dinner. I still folded laundry. I still left notes on the fridge when milk was low. But no one responded anymore. They walked past me like a hallway lamp always on. Never noticed. I once found a sticky note on my bedroom door. "Please knock before entering. Filming in progress." It was my house, my hallway. But I didn't knock, I just stood there, hand hovering near the knob, and let the moment pass, like so many others swallowed whole. And even then, even in that fading echo of belonging, I told myself it would pass, that families go through shifts, that maybe I was just overreacting, that maybe love required a quieter kind of patience. But the truth is, the house hadn't changed. The people in it had. And those rooms, those beautiful, sacred, memory-soaked rooms, had grown unfamiliar, like they remembered everything, except me. I wasn't replaced with force, I was quietly overwritten, room by room. It started with the picture frames, quietly, discreetly, like a draft sneaking through a closed window. One morning, I noticed the photo of Caleb at age 5, grinning in a Superman costume and clutching my hand at the pumpkin patch, had vanished from the hallway shelf. In its place sat a sculptural candle shaped like a seashell, ivory and cold. I assumed it had been moved, perhaps to be dusted or reframed. But when I searched the other shelves, the sideboard, even the drawers in the hallway cabinet, it wasn't there. Then the wedding photo I had once proudly displayed, the one I took for them, where Ivy was barefoot in the garden, and Caleb was smiling in a way I hadn't seen since, was replaced by a monochrome print of a eucalyptus branch. At first, I tried not to think much of it. Styles change, people rearrange. But by the third week, my quilt, the one I spent an entire summer stitching by hand, was gone from the couch, swapped for a soft beige throw, with a boutique tag still attached. The knitted potholders my sister sent me each Christmas disappeared from the kitchen drawers. The robin's egg blue vase I'd found in an antique store during a road trip with Caleb gone, replaced by a tall, sleek glass cylinder holding one dried palm leaf. It was all too curated. The home I built was being unbuilt. One object at a time. I remember opening the fridge and seeing labels on the shelves. Snacks, beverages, fresh. Ivy said it made it more aesthetic for content. I said nothing. I had started saying nothing more often. But that didn't mean I didn't feel everything. I'd walk past my own reflection in the hallway mirror and barely recognize the woman staring back, the one who used to choose furniture by how it made a room feel, not how it looked on camera. I tried to hold on to my routines. I still rose early, still tended the garden, still brewed a pot of tea and poured it into the same chipped mug I'd had since my first year of teaching. I still left handwritten notes on the counter when I went out back by 2, left banana bread in the oven. Ivy never acknowledged them. Eventually, they disappeared too, like everything else. One evening, I walked into the kitchen to find Ivy filming a tutorial on creating a minimalist brunch spread. My grandmother's porcelain teacups had been replaced with matte black ceramics. The lace table runner I had inherited from my mother was nowhere in sight. Instead, a slate gray tablecloth and gold cutlery I had never seen before were spread out, in perfect symmetry. Ivy smiled at the camera, poured orange juice from a vintage-style pitcher she must have bought online, and said, "This house has always had charm, I just had to bring it out." I stood in the doorway, invisible in the same space I had once wallpapered by hand. Caleb was holding the ring light steady, nodding as Ivy spoke. Like none of this was strange, like this was just normal. Now, I wanted to scream, not from rage, but from erasure. But instead, I walked to the back garden and sat on the old wooden bench Caleb built with me when he was 12, the one with initials carved in the side. I ran my fingers over the M+C = sign always, and felt the ache swell so silently it nearly crushed me. That night, I pulled down a box from the attic marked Christmas and found my old journals. I flipped through them looking for some reminder that this life had, in fact, belonged to me. I found a list Caleb made when he was 7, 10 things I love about mommy. Number 4 was, she smells like cinnamon toast. Number 7 was, she lets me cry when I don't have words. I clutched the list like scripture. In the living room, Ivy was hosting a live stream. I heard her say, "This space is such a blank canvas. We've really made it our own. Our, not hers, not mine. Ours, except one of us was fading." The next morning, I went to grab a book from the shelf in the den, my copy of 𝗪𝗶𝗲𝗍, the one annotated with my notes from years of teaching, and the shelf was empty. In its place, white pottery, stacked coffee table books with titles like Mindful Living and The Art of Curated Spaces. I opened a drawer, empty. I checked the guest room closet, now their walk-in wardrobe. My boxes were gone. Caleb said nothing. He asked nothing. Just kissed Ivy's head on his way out the door, tossed me a morning mom without looking up from his phone, and disappeared. That afternoon, I wandered into my old bedroom, now labeled studio on Ivy's content calendar stuck to the fridge. The windows were covered with gauzy white curtains. The walls painted a color called soft bone. Apparently, the bed was gone. In its place, a sleek desk, a ring light, and a bookshelf filled with props. I sat on the floor, surrounded by the echo of what had been, and closed my eyes. I could still hear Caleb's voice from years ago, whispering, "This is our forever place." Right. Mom. I didn't answer him then. I don't know if I ever believed in forever. but I believed in us. And now, even that had been redecorated. I wasn't asked to leave. I was slowly replaced until nothing, with my name on it, remained. It was a Saturday. In early spring, the kind of day where the light feels thinner, and everything has a quiet sharpness to it. And the house smelled like eucalyptus and lemon, though not the real kind, just the curated, candle-filtered version Ivy preferred. I had spent the morning cleaning fingerprints off the glass doors, baking lemon almond cookies from a recipe Caleb once called his favorite, and setting out extra cutlery from the drawer Ivy rarely opened. I hadn't been told there would be guests, not directly. I'd overheard Ivy on the phone, mentioning a little gathering. Nothing big, and assumed it was one of her influencer things. A brand celebration. Maybe, or a photo shoot, the kind of thing she did often now, turning moments into content, real life into campaigns. Still, I put on my soft gray cardigan, brushed my hair, and made myself small enough not to interrupt but present enough not to be forgotten. Around noon, they started arriving polished women with perfect manicures and the same breathy laugh, men with tailored button-ups and smooth confidence, all carrying wine or monogrammed tote bags or little boxes tied with ribbon. Ivy floated through them like a hostess, in a catalog, her smile wide, her arms open. "So glad you're here, we've been working on this for weeks." I watched from the threshold of the kitchen, one hand resting lightly on the edge of the marble island. I'd spent 20 years dreaming of a kitchen like this, spacious, sunlit, warm, and now I hovered in it like a stranger, in someone else's Airbnb. Caleb passed by, once offered me a tight-lipped smile. "Mom, could you keep the cat in your room for now? Ivy's allergic." She wasn't, but I nodded anyway. Walked down the hallway and let 𝗕𝗁 curl beside the window. Even the cat knew not to ask anymore. I returned to the main space, stood near the dining area, and watched as guests took in the design. "Wow, this place is so serene," one woman said, running her fingers along the oak banister. I sanded myself. "In 2007, it's like walking into a mood board." Another added, sipping something pink from a coupe glass. Ivy beamed. "It's all about intentional living. We've really transformed this space into something that reflects who we are." I opened my mouth then, just slightly, just enough to breathe in and maybe say something, but Caleb caught my eye and gently shook his head. That was when her mother appeared, perfectly coiffed, pearl earrings catching the light, voice high and curious. "Darling," she said to Ivy, her eyes sweeping the room. "Who's that woman in the back? She looks familiar." Ivy laughed, an airy, rehearsed laugh that floated just high enough to carry over the music. "Oh, her, that's Helen. She came with the house." A few chuckles bubbled up. "She didn't stop. Kind of our unofficial housekeeper. She's sweet, loves the garden." And then she sipped her drink, and the conversation moved on like I hadn't just been turned into a footnote, a prop, a leftover. No one looked at me, no one corrected her, not even Caleb. I was still holding the tray of cookies untouched, carefully plated, warm. I walked into the kitchen, placed them gently on the counter, and stared at the granite for a full minute, waiting for something, an apology, a glance, a whisper of regret. Nothing came. Laughter rose from the other room. Someone clinked a glass. Ivy launched into a story about her journey to authenticity. I picked up a wine bottle to open it and realized my hands were shaking, not with anger, with recognition. I had become invisible by degrees, and now, apparently, I was inherited furniture. I set the bottle down, pressed both palms to the counter, and willed myself not to cry. Then, Quietly, I turned and walked down the hall. Past the pantry I had reorganized a dozen times. Past the linen closet where my embroidered tablecloths used to live. And into my room. I closed the door behind me, not all the way. Just enough to dull the sound. I sat on the edge of my bed, hands resting in my lap, and listened as the house I built filled with voices that no longer said my name. My throat burned not from tears, but from silence, the kind of silence that thickens in your chest and presses against your ribs like an echo, trying to get out. 𝗕𝗫 jumped into my lap soft and unbothered, and I buried my fingers in her fur, grounding myself in the only thing that still remembered how to seek me out. Later that evening, long after the party wound down, and the scent of designer perfume and filtered praise had thinned, Caleb knocked lightly on my door. "Thanks for helping out today," he said like I was a temp staffer. I nodded. "The cookies were good," he added, and for a second, I thought he might say more, but he didn't. He turned away, already scrolling his phone. The next morning the tray was still there, half full, untouched, a single bite taken from one. No note, no thank you, just crumbs and the quiet ache of being erased even while standing in plain sight. I wasn't humiliated loudly, I was dismissed gently, until I believed it was normal. The silence didn't arrive like thunder, didn't crash down or split the air, it seeped in, soft and cold and unremarkable, like condensation on a window that you only notice when your reflection disappears behind it. One morning, I realized I hadn't spoken aloud to anyone in the house for 4 days. Not a single syllable. I had greeted the cat. I had murmured a few lines from a poem while wiping the counter, something about being seen. Only when broken. But I hadn't exchanged a word with Caleb or Ivy. And the strangest thing wasn't that I had gone silent, but that they hadn't noticed. Not once had anyone said, "Are you okay?" or even, "Did you sleep well?" I could have evaporated into the walls and the house would have still breathed on. Without me, I still did everything. I still brewed coffee at 𝗕𝗃, sharp stirred in cinnamon the way Caleb always liked. Though the pot remained full most days, I still folded laundry left in the machine. Sorted mismatched socks replaced the dryer sheets with the kind Ivy preferred, lavender eucalyptus blend. I still wiped crumbs off counters and wrote reminders on Post-it notes and then watched them get crumpled, or worse, replaced with Ivy's printed, color-coded to-do lists that didn't include my name. I kept writing in my journal, pages filled with fragments of what used to matter. Today, I cleaned the fireplace. No one said a word. Today, I sat in the garden for 3 hours. No one asked where I'd gone. Today, I remembered the way Caleb used to rest his head on my lap when he had nightmares and how I'd hum until his breathing slowed. That memory made me pause. It landed like a stone in still water, sending ripples through the quiet I'd been trying to pretend didn't exist. I started walking more at first, just to the mailbox and back, then around the neighborhood, then into town, where I'd drift through the aisles of the bookstore pretending to browse, while actually just listening to people laughing, debating the merits of novels, sighing at familiar covers. I bought a notebook, one with a blue linen cover, and started copying down overheard sentences, pieces of other people's lives that still felt textured and real. She's been gone a year, and I still make 2 cups of tea. I don't think she ever knew. I forgave her. I collected these, like anchors. At home, the air thinned. Ivy's voice grew more present but less real. "We're entering a new season of refinement," she announced in one of her videos, standing in the very hallway where Caleb had once scribbled on the wallpaper, and blamed the cat. She didn't know that story, she didn't care to. I was no longer a keeper of memory, I was an interference. In aesthetic. One night, I entered the kitchen to find her filming a nighttime reset routine. The lights were dimmed, the table set with black ceramic bowls and brass spoons. Ivy wore a matching silk pajama set, hair tied in a loose ribbon, face radiant, with the kind of glow that doesn't come from peace but from lighting. Caleb stood off to the side, holding a diffuser bottle. "Smile softer," she instructed. He obeyed. I stood behind them in the shadow of the archway, and something ancient in me cracked. Not rage, not sorrow, something worse. Recognition. I was not a participant, I was a byproduct. I turned away and walked to the room that was no longer mine, where the walls bore no trace of the photos I once hung, and I sat on the edge of the bed, holding a letter I'd found in a shoebox months earlier. Caleb's, age 10, in pencil-smudged cursive. "I hope you never forget how much I need you." I had folded that letter and unfolded it so many times. The creases felt like scars. I pressed it to my chest and whispered, "I forgot." Not him, me. I forgot to protect the part of me that knew what being needed really felt like. Now even that word had dulled. Needed. I was tolerated, absorbed into routine, and gradually, quietly, removed. That week, I went 3 more days without being spoken to. No one asked where I was when I didn't cook dinner. No one noticed when I didn't refill the soap dispensers. And then one afternoon, I overheard Ivy tell someone on the phone, "It's just us here now. It's so peaceful." I stood in the hallway, with my back pressed against the wall, hand clutching the doorknob, to my own room, and thought, so this is how a presence becomes absence. No explosion, no confrontation, just the slow disappearance of words, of space, of being looked at and seen. I wasn't quiet, because I had nothing to say. I was quiet because there was no one left who wanted to hear me. And when I looked at Caleb across the dinner table 2 nights later, when he complimented Ivy on her vegan stew and didn't even glance at me, I realized something. That should have broken me. But didn't. I wasn't even angry anymore. I had simply become air. I wasn't silenced with cruelty. I was erased with indifference, and that was louder than any scream. It was a Tuesday, when the thought struck me not as a revelation, but as a question I couldn't ignore. Whose name is on the deed now? I hadn't looked in years, not since I'd signed the original papers. 2 decades earlier, sitting across from a realtor who shook my hand and said, "This house will remember you." I remembered thinking it was a beautiful sentiment back when I still believed places could hold memory better than people did. That morning, after Ivy left for her branding shoot, and Caleb had wandered out with a thermos I'd filled but went unacknowledged, I pulled the old metal file box from the linen closet, hidden behind stacked towels that no one used anymore. The original deed was there, folded neatly in a manila envelope. My name, Helen Elaine Moore, in black ink, dated and notarized, the last official mark of who I was, before everything blurred. But then I checked online. Heart slow and thick in my chest, fingers clumsy against the keys. The county registry had a new entry, a new application. The name Ivy Moore appeared on a recent filing, intent to transfer ownership. There was a signature line marked "Consent of Existing Title Holder." It wasn't mine, but it looked close, too close. I stared at the curve of the H, the length of the tail on the M, and I knew they had forged it. Or perhaps Caleb had. Perhaps he didn't even hesitate. I printed the page and read it again. Under the kitchen light, the same light I once replaced with a thrifted chandelier, because Caleb said it made the room feel like magic. I pressed the page against the counter. My fingerprints blurred against the glass. The house didn't feel like magic anymore. It felt like theft, and not just of walls and rooms, but of time, of identity, of the history I once etched into these floorboards, with each careful, exhausted choice. I remembered repainting the stairs while Caleb napped upstairs with a fever, how I'd tiptoed so the creaks wouldn't wake him. I remembered installing the ceiling fan in what used to be his room, hands blistering, but proud. I remembered sitting in the bathtub fully clothed the day I got tenure, crying from relief, drinking warm champagne from a mug because there were no clean glasses. Every corner of this house held me, and now I didn't even legally own it. My chest didn't burn with rage. It sank with something deeper, a betrayal that wasn't sharp, but dull and heavy, a betrayal that came not with a knife but with a pen. And that was the moment I knew this wasn't just erasure. This was erasure dressed up as rebranding. This was someone painting over my name with theirs and calling it reinvention. I placed the forged document beside Caleb's childhood letter, the one where he wrote, "This house is our castle, and you're the queen." The words felt mocking now. I reached for my phone, not to call them, not to confront them. I Googled a lawyer. Property law. Forgery quietly. Efficiently. Not because I wanted to fight, but because I was done surrendering to people who thought I'd never dare lift a sword. I wasn't their housekeeper. I wasn't their shadow. I was the woman who built the very ground they were trying to steal. And I remembered something the realtor once told me: houses don't forget, but sometimes they wait for you to remember who you are. I wasn't asked to sign it over. I was simply erased, one forged line at a time. I packed in silence, just as I had lived, no bags scraping floors, no drawers slammed, no footsteps to mark a departure. Only the soft rustle of fabric folding into itself, and the occasional creak of a box lid, closing over something no one would miss. But me, I didn't take much, a single suitcase. My journals, the letter Caleb wrote when he was 10, the scarf he gave me at 17, when he still looked at me like I was the safest place in the world. I didn't take the crystal glasses I inherited from my mother. I didn't take the painting above the fireplace, or the embroidered quilt I had stitched by hand, not because they didn't matter, but because they belonged to a version of me that had been gently, expertly erased. I left the house at dawn, before Ivy's diffuser clicked on, and before Caleb's alarm buzzed. For the third time, 𝗕𝗀, the cat, twirled around my ankles, sensing the shift. I whispered, "I'll come back for you, little one," though I didn't know if I ever would. I placed the house keys on the kitchen counter next to the untouched banana bread from the night before and left no note. What could I possibly write? I used to be your mother. I used to matter here. Please, remember me. Know the silence I left behind, was my final answer. I stepped out onto the porch, the air still cool, the sky not yet bruised with sunrise. I stood for a moment. Fingers resting on the wooden railing, I sanded myself. One spring long ago, while Caleb played on the lawn with a cardboard sword. The railing still bore a faint mark from when he carved his initials with a spoon, giggling as I pretended to scold him. I traced the dent, then let my hand fall. I walked down the path without looking back. No dramatic pause, no tearful farewell, just the sound of my breath sinking with each step, away from the place I had once called home. When I reached the edge of the driveway, I glanced up at the second-floor window, my old bedroom. Now Ivy's wellness studio, the curtains drawn, the light off. the space already rebranded for someone else's reflection. It struck me not with pain, but with eerie clarity. I was not being missed, not now. Not yet. Maybe not ever. I climbed into the car, started the engine, and drove not fast. Not fleeing. Just steady. Deliberate, as if I were finally arriving somewhere. I was always meant to go. The city disappeared behind me like a fog lifting. When I reached the outskirts of town, I stopped at a red light and looked at my own face. In the rearview mirror, I didn't look triumphant. I didn't look broken, I looked real. And I whispered to that reflection, "You did not disappear. You were removed." I checked into a small motel, off the highway, the kind with scratchy sheets and vending machines that ate quarters. The woman at the front desk didn't ask questions. She just handed me a key. I entered room 4, sat on the bed, and opened the window. The air smelled like damp pavement and something faintly metallic, but it was mine. The quiet was different here, not weaponized, not filtered through someone else's comfort. It was mine. That night I placed the keys on the bedside table, next to the childhood letter, and laid down, fully clothed, eyes wide open, heart oddly still. No one texted, no one called. The silence didn't surprise me. What surprised me was that for the first time in years it didn't hurt. I wasn't told to leave. I just stepped out and no one noticed. I was gone. I didn't plan revenge. I planned truth, the kind of truth that doesn't scream, or threaten, or demand an audience. It just walks in, calm and undeniable, and quietly changes everything. The morning after I left, I sat at the motel desk with a cup of instant coffee and opened my laptop. The screen glowed softly, asking me for a search term, and I typed 3 words that felt like lighting a match in a room soaked with silence: property title attorney. I found one 15 minutes away. A woman named 𝗕𝗰𝗸𝗁, mid-50s, stern face in her photo, and eyes that didn't suffer nonsense. I emailed her, explained nothing, only asked if she could confirm whether a signature on a deed transfer was legally binding without original owner consent. 10 minutes later, she called me directly. I told her everything, not with tears or trembling, just the facts. The forged signature, the filings, the shift in ownership that I never agreed to in a house I had bought alone, paid off myself brick by breathless brick. She listened, took notes, asked sharp questions, and when I finished, she said, "Come in today." I did. Her office smelled like paper and lavender oil, like someone who spent a lot of time holding other people's damage and trying to make it presentable. She reviewed the documents I brought, examined the signature, the filing timestamps, and leaned back in her chair. "This is actionable," she said. "Forgery and fraud, if we can tie in the mortgage leverage." My heart didn't race. I only nodded. "What do you want to do?" she asked. And I surprised myself when I answered. "I don't want to destroy them. I want them to see the foundation they're standing on isn't theirs." Over the next week, Ruthie built a case like a house measured, quiet, intentional. I provided everything: the deed, utility bills in my name, photos from move-in day, receipts for renovations, even Caleb's birthday card from age 10 that said, "Thank you for giving me this house to grow in." I started a new journal, not the one filled with grief, but one filled with facts, dates, times, financial filings. Ivy's influencer brand, 𝗕𝗰𝗲𝗁, was public, everything curated, everything bragged about. I took screenshots. I logged sponsors' collaborations, language she used that made it sound like the home was generational wealth. From her side, it was all there. And then I dug deeper. Her company's business license was newly formed, no tax filings for the past year. Her clients were shell Instagram accounts. Her address for business purposes? My house. I emailed 𝗕𝗰𝗲𝗄𝗏. I'm not angry. I wrote, but I refuse to be erased. Meanwhile, I started walking again, not aimlessly, but with direction. I found the library downtown, tucked between a bakery and a bike shop, and applied for a card. The librarian, Nathan, in his 30s thoughtful eyes, walked me through the system. He asked if I liked fiction or nonfiction. Memoir, I said, but the kind where people don't realize it's a survival manual. Until the last chapter. He smiled. You should write one. I looked down at my hands, at the ink-stained fingers from notes taken in motel light, and said, maybe I already am. Each day, I returned to the library with my laptop and wrote not a novel, a blueprint, a retelling, not for anyone else. Not yet, just so that I wouldn't forget the difference between living and being used. One afternoon, Nathan saw my notes spread across the table and asked gently, "You a teacher?" I nodded. Once, before I became invisible. He didn't laugh, he just nodded back. You don't seem invisible now. The kindness of it almost cracked me almost. But I was rebuilding now, and cracks could wait. Back at the motel, Ruthie emailed. Filed motion to freeze the title transfer pending investigation. You're listed as primary owner. Expect resistance. I replied. I'm ready, and I was not in the way I used to be, with open arms and hopeful forgiveness, but in the way that comes after everything you thought was your life falls apart, and you start gathering the rubble with steady hands, deciding what pieces still belong to you. I watched Ivy's social media more closely now. She posted a morning ritual reel in my kitchen. The light perfect. Her caption glowing, "Rise in the energy of what you've created." I almost laughed. What she created. I had laid those floorboards. I had stripped that paint. I had stood in that exact spot holding Caleb's feverish body at 2 a.m. when the world felt like it might end. And now she lit candles there and whispered to strangers selling calm. That night, I found the business email of one of her sponsors, a home goods brand, using her domestic authenticity to sell lavender-scented sheets. I didn't write anything angry, I just sent an anonymous tip, attached the forgery documents, and added she does not own the home she films in. The paperwork is under legal dispute. Use discretion. I never heard back. But 2 days later, Ivy's post had vanished. Another sponsor quietly untagged her. I wasn't setting fires. I was turning on the lights. Caleb still hadn't called. He didn't know I knew. He didn't know the floor beneath him was starting to shift, but soon he would. And when that moment came, it wouldn't be explosive. It would be precise, legal, undeniable, because I wasn't there to scream anymore. I was there to reclaim. I didn't want revenge. I wanted proof that I still existed. It started small, the way a ceiling leaks before it caves, the kind of shift no one notices until it's too late to stop. Ivy's first post to Glitch was a sponsored video for a skincare brand shot in the bathroom I tiled myself 12 years ago, where she had lit 3 candles and spoke softly about ancestral calm. The brand pulled the link, within hours issuing a vague statement about internal discrepancies. She posted a quote the next morning. When they go low, we rise, paired with a photo of her holding a mug labeled "worthy." But the comments beneath had changed. No more hearts. No more fire emojis, just questions. Wait, do you really own that house? I heard it's not even in your name. Wasn't this filmed in someone else's kitchen? And then came the silence. Posts slowed, brand tags disappeared. The curated image cracked, not with drama, but with absence. I watched it all unfold from a coffee shop near the library, tea cooling beside my journal, as Ivy's digital empire withered, pixel by pixel. Ruthie called the same afternoon. Motion passed, she said. We've frozen the transfer. She can't claim the house. Next up, damages. If you want them. I didn't. I wasn't interested in compensation. I wanted clarity. I wanted names put back where they belonged. I wanted the house to breathe my name again. The night before the court notice arrived at the house, I walked past it for the first time. Since I left, the porch light was off. The curtains were drawn. The lavender bush I planted was dying. Leaves curled, soil cracked. I didn't cry. I didn't ache. I just stood across the street and watched the front door, like it was a mouth about to open. The next morning, Ivy received the envelope, a cease and desist, legal notification of the pending investigation, asset freeze, and fraudulent misrepresentation. Caleb called me 10 minutes later. I didn't answer. He left a voicemail. Voice, tight edges fraying. Mom, what is this? Why are you doing this? As if I had started the fire, instead of simply pointing out the smoke. I didn't reply. I let him sit with the silence. He'd taught me so well. 2 days later, he called again, his voice cracked this time. We didn't mean to. I didn't know she filed those papers. She said it was just for business. Just a formality, Mom. Please call me. Still, I didn't, because a voice that only calls when its world begins to collapse is not a voice I owe myself to. Ivy sent an email. Polished and performative. Margaret.